to a special edition of the Darden Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you're listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, we return to our ongoing Faculty Spotlight series, a series we call Office Hours, with a conversation with Doug Thomas. Doug is a member of the Technology and Operations Management faculty, and he and I recently connected to talk more about his background, what led him to Darden, his research interests, what's happening in the world of supply chains, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. Now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Doug Thomas. Welcome, everybody, to the latest installment in our ongoing Faculty Spotlight series, a series we call Office Hours. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and I'm joined today by a member of the Technology and Operations Management faculty, Doug Thomas. Doug, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Brett. I'm excited for the conversation. Yeah, I figured I should be in my office for Office Hours, so I came in.
That's all right. I appreciate it. And it's great to have you here. We had a lot of interest in this conversation, which means people must really want to talk about supply chains, operations, all the things that we're going to get into in this conversation. For folks who are newer to Office Hours, haven't had a chance to join us for one of these sessions before, just a little bit of an overview about the flow of our conversation. So I have some questions here for Doug, but you may have questions as we go along. If you do have questions, please feel free to ask via the Q&A. I always share at the top. We'll not be able to get to everybody's questions, but we'll try to work in a few as we go. The first third of the conversation is really typically about the guest's background and what got them to Darden. They teach here, and then we transition. The middle third is a lot about the classes they teach. And then the final third, I think we're going to have a pretty robust conversation here, is around the research interests, hot topics from the world, things that align with the work that they do. And so thank you again for being here. And again, if you do have questions, please feel free to ask via the Q&A. All right. Well, Doug, first question. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and your background.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we teach case method, which means we usually ask questions, but we are professors, so we're capable of talking about ourselves as well. I'm Doug Thomas, faculty member here at the Darden School. This is year 10 for me here. Was on the faculty at Penn State for a good stretch before that, and before that, I was academically raised as an industrial engineer, studied operations research, building quantitative models to optimize things, factories, supply chains, et cetera. And then left engineering school, went to a business school at Penn State, and then got recruited into the best job in the world, which is a faculty member here at the Darden School.
How did you decide you wanted to be a faculty member? That's something that you wanted to do.
I think so. My father, who was a business school professor, so I grew up around them, and I saw what looked like a pretty good deal. I actually arrived at the decision relatively late in my formal education, because what drew me into what I studied was not leading people, not being an educator. It was working on and solving interesting problems. So I love that. I love the education aspect of my job now, and I have for quite a stretch. But my draw to the subject was like, oh, there's really interesting problems, and so I thought I was going to go work for software company or consulting company and just go work on solving interesting quantitative problems, and then realized that as a faculty member, we talk a lot about case method and the educational environment, which is amazing. There's this other half of our lives, which we'll get to in the back third of our conversation, of our scholarly work. And so you get, I wanted to solve interesting problems. I get to do it, right? I just also get to interact with an amazing set of both faculty and staff colleagues, but amazing students that come through our programs.
You mentioned you have the best job in the world. You get to be a faculty member here at Darden. What brought you to Darden?
Well, I joined the faculty at Penn State. I grew up in Ithaca, New York, where Cornell is, and so I've spent the vast majority of my life in beautiful university-centric towns, Ithaca, and then State College, Pennsylvania, now Charlottesville. And I had known the Darden faculty in my area in operations management for a long time. These academic disciplines are relatively small environment, so you know everybody. And I always thought Darden was a very desirable place to be, both from the locale. I love living here in Charlottesville, but the unique case method, student-centered learning, student ownership of the educational process. So I don't think I've said this publicly before, but I tried to get Darden to hire me 3 separate times before it took. So when I was coming out of graduate school, I wanted a job. Got a job at Penn State and had a wonderful run there. And then I don't know, around 2008, Darden was looking for a faculty member, and I reached out through my network, and they decided to hire younger, faculty coming fresh out of school instead of more seasoned folks. And then, the third time, about around 2016, one of the faculty members that I knew called me up and said, "Okay, now's the time. Now we want you to come." And I came here and taught as a visitor, and fell in love with the place. So, um, and I think my colleagues don't regret hiring me. But I stuck with it and eventually got here to the best job in the world.
Worth knowing. And for those of you who don't know Doug as well, pretty dry sense of humor. Probably picking up on that already. So you come to Darden. You mentioned you really enjoy Charlottesville. Many of the folks who are on this call may not have had a chance to spend time in Charlottesville. What do you like about Charlottesville?
Well, I grew up in a relatively small town, a little bit smaller, but not a lot, than Charlottesville, where Cornell University is. And first, university towns generally, um, they're smaller. There's a little bit less of sort of big city traffic and those kinds of things. I really like living out in the woods, so I live on a bunch of land out in the woods, and it's easy to do that here, where you're a 15-minute drive away rather than having to go out hours. So some of it is rural living for me. A lot of it is that you when you have that university kind of community, it it supports art, music, theater, restaurants, sort of punches above its weight, and so you get sort of a small town with lots of really good things. I mean, I heard it described just a couple of days ago that in Charlottesville, there's one for on the restaurant side. There's one good everything. So I mean, you go to New York City or big cities around the world, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can get Thai food anywhere. Like, there's one good Thai place. There's one good Ethiopian place. There's one good Ecuadorian place right around the corner. So it's not it's different than a big city, but you get a lot of that kind of living. And then you said at the top, Brett, that you're sitting in Roslyn, right, which is, folks may know, but right outside of Washington D.C. And so we get sort of the life we get to live here in a relatively small town with good amenities, and we get to spend a lot of time in and around the DC metro area. So you get sort of a shot at the big city things when you need them, and then get to live out here.
Yeah, I think that's important to note. I mean, we see full-time MBA students up here quite often. We just had the Baton Tech Connect back in the fall, where students go and visit tech companies, spend half the day at those companies and the other half of the day here at Sam's Family Grounds, and panel discussions. And so, should really think about this as a student who's looking at Darden as kind of best of both worlds. Like, you can tap into DC, but obviously, if you're a full-time MBA student, you're primarily based in Charlottesville. And for our working professional students, they're primarily based here in the DC area, but they also get time in Charlottesville. So you kind of get two campuses, so to speak, for the price of one. You remember the operations faculty. What attracted you to operations?
Yeah, I think it's the problem solving. Like, so I sort of grew into this of faculty members like to study things and tell others about things. I was academically raised as an engineer, so I like to build things, make things. And so the kinds of things that I started working on were like, okay, how can we make this factory run better? How can we decide the best place to put warehouses? How can we decide the best place to solve these kinds of operational problems of how do you deliver on the product or service that your company is delivering on? Um, and then I sort of drifted into, long ago, but drifted into really enjoying the people side of that. So I started out saying, like, I like to have data, or mathematical models, or optimize things, and then enjoyed seeing things implemented, seeing things done and built. And then that, of course, intersects with how can you lead a team to make these improvements? How can you have influence in an organization, whether you're delivering products, services, software, whatever? How can you bring the people together to do that? So my portfolio of work has still been sort of a mix of those things for a long time, which is, they're still on a can't see them. It's, equations up on the whiteboard. And then there's also, sort of managerial leadership kinds of things that I teach. So it's that mix that I really enjoy.
You teach operations in the core curriculum. One of the things that comes up, and I've actually got a question about it here in the Q&A, is how do you keep, with everything happening in the world, obviously the world's changing very quickly. How do you keep like a core operations class? You make sure you get the fundamentals, but also keep it connected to what's happening in industry.
That's a great question. I mean, we have, one of the wonderful things about being a faculty member here is we have amazing uh, case researchers, help people that help us write cases, and we have a culture, with our alums and our extended network of thinking about, coming back and our former students coming back and saying, hey, I really think there's this interesting case going on. So, in fact, yesterday I had a call with a chief supply chain officer for a large company, who's working with a former student. My former student reports to him, and they're like, they're leading this huge digital transformation for all their supply chain capabilities, and called me up and said, hey, this might make an interesting case. You want to write a case about this and have the chief supply chain officer come to your class? And I said, yeah, that sounds good. So one of the ways is that we're always looking to add new cases, um, and of course, if you're a company now doing a big supply chain transformation, it's necessarily current and keeping up with you know tariffs and fuel prices and AI and autonomous and whatever it is. So that's one way. The other is that we have this half of our lives as professors where we do our research, and you have to publish new things. You can't publish old things, and so we're pushing boundaries there, in terms of that. And then the third thing I'd say, you asked about how to keep things current. The third thing I'd say is, as much as the world is changing, there are some foundational things that we've figured out really good ways to teach. And so, I was asked a really good question. I was doing a similar kind of panel discussion of like, it's like, hey, Doug, you've been teaching a supply chain management elective for 20 years. How different does it look now? And the answer is a lot different, but it's not 100% different. It's like, well, there's still these fundamental building blocks. There's still this stuff that we've figured out how to teach incredibly effectively in this learner-centric model. And so it's not like, oh my gosh, we have to rip up everything we've done this year because, you know, the next iteration of ChatGPT came out and it's completely changed the world.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the most common questions we get from prospective students now is, how is AI coming into the classroom? How are Darden faculty leveraging artificial intelligence? You teach a few different classes. We're going to talk about your electives in a second, but I'm curious, like, how are you thinking about AI in the classes that you teach?
Uh, I think I put it in my head in two buckets, which is, how are we, like any other business that's delivering a product or service, how can we leverage it to deliver the thing that we deliver? And what I mean by that is, and then I separate that from topically, like, oh, we're going to write a case and we're going to deliver knowledge or content around AI. But let me talk first about how we're using AI. We are fortunate to have a lot of connected alums, and we're able to commit some resources to stepping into AI in a very big way, almost immediately setting up, a certificate, sort of a specialization with elective courses around AI. Um, so that's on the content side. On the usage side, we immediately started using, um, the equivalent of sort of a chatbot, a tutor, to complement the interaction with your with student peers and faculty. We just finished deploying that last semester in one of our core courses, not mine, but we're actually rolling that out. Someone may be teaching it up at SANS, but deploying AI in the classroom, we actually have partnered with uh, a collection of other universities to do basically a controlled experiment. And like, okay, look, we all teach similar things in core operations. Let's flip a coin and randomly insert some AI to support learning here and not here, and try to measure performance and learning objectives. And so uh, we've we're investing a lot of time and energy in both content to teach and how you can facilitate it. The pilot that we did in a different core course last semester, in a strategy course, uh, basically created this. You can have your own one-on-one little mini coaching case discussion thing. Like here's what I'm thinking about this particular case, and then the 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 GPT that was deployed for that sort of interacts with them. So it's not fundamentally changing our learning experience. Our learning experience is you the participant do the individual case read, you interact with a learning team and bounce some ideas, you have the case discussion in class, and then you reflect and try to embed the takeaways. So that's until the physiology of the human brain changes, that's going to be the process. It's just where does AI sort of fit into that is going to evolve over time. But it's sort of doing somewhere between this individual and learning team thing that I get to bounce some ideas off. We've heard anecdotally some good things about people that may be less extroverted, or maybe it's English as a second language. They can sort of, in just a few minutes, bounce a few ideas off to get more comfortable for what's a very dynamic, very fast moving classroom environment.
Yeah, I appreciate your sort of bucketing. There's sort of two buckets, like, how are you using it around how students are learning and the classroom experience, and then sort of the content a- aspect of it. One of the things that's fun to ask faculty on these conversations is in the operations core class that you teach, is there a case that you really enjoy teaching? I find this helpful in animating the experience for students a little bit more.
Um, I enjoy teaching all of them, Brett. Uh, we just did a new case to kick off the operations core this week, just a couple of days ago. That one of my colleagues, Tanina Feldman, wrote about Lyft, LYFT, the ride sharing, and sort of the arc of how do you create the digital platform to bring together riders and drivers. Where does investments in autonomous fit in? What are the trade-offs with surge pricing? A lot of what we try to accomplish in at least one part of the operations core is big, important resource allocation decisions that help match demand and supply. And it's just a very rich environment because you have this, if you think I have a factory, and I have to make how many machines to make how many widgets, and I estimate demand. There's sort of a very fixed capacity. And then you go to a setting like Uber and Lyft, and it says, well, I could invest in my pool of vehicles or autonomous vehicles. I can allow third-party gig workers in, and so you get this much richer kind of thing. And so we actually kicked off the course um, this quarter with that, and it's one of the things that makes it great is you have this very dynamic environment with all these levers. Almost everybody in the class can relate, like they've experienced it, so that it's easy for them to, like, yeah, I was a writer and I liked this, or I got annoyed that the surge pricing was this and I felt ripped off, or what. Everybody can relate to it. And it's this big, complicated strategic problem, and a lot of what we do is help people figure out I'm overwhelmed by this problem. Where do I start? How do I start building structure? You sort of work your way down, say, okay, I got my handle around this, and I work my way back up. So I had a lot of fun teaching that. But that may be that I'm sure there's another one or two that would pop to my head, but that's the one that I taught 3 days ago. So that's what I'm going with.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an unfair question, honestly. I know there's many cases that you enjoy, and every case discussion is a little bit different from the last, just because of the mix of people in the room. I want to talk about your electives now. So you have an elective called Leading Operational Excellence. So you mentioned really enjoying sort of this sort of thinking about how to make things better, but also the people element of it. So tell us a little bit more about Leading Operational Excellence. What's this class all about?
Yeah. So when I started uh, my academic career in graduate school, it was sort of at a critical point where the amount of manufacturing that was done in the U.S. was much higher. The amount of manufacturing employment was much higher than it is. Right. This is, gosh, almost 30 years ago. And so, a lot of what we taught, a lot of what we talked about was what is now called sort of Lean Six Sigma or Toyota production system, right? How do I collect data, make sure that the process is in control? How do I inspect in quality, that sort of thing? And so there's this body of work around process improvement. How do I get better at delivering the product or service? This was long enough ago. This makes me feel a little bit. This was long enough ago. This was sort of before things like agile, which is has a lot of overlap with that kind of, agile for software development, or just the structured process by which you try to deliver your product or service or experience as efficiently as possible, and that interacts incredibly with people. So part of the brilliance of the Toyota production system, which was sort of the place where these kinds of things really took hold in manufacturing, is, we had an industrial revolution. For 70 years, people thought it was very sort of command and control. Someone tells me, Doug, to turn the wrench this way. And there was this insight to say, hey, the people doing the work might know something about doing the work. It's sort of an obvious insight, but it took decades to do that. And so it's this mix of structured problem solving. I measure output, defects, etc., and I create structures to empower the people who are doing the work to to take ownership of of leading the improvement. So you have to get them engaged, you have to motivate them, you have to put the right structures in place, you have to empower them. And so that course is about how do you what's the mix of those things. And so they'll there are class sessions in there where we're talking about, here are these interpersonal dynamics, how do you navigate that? There's also parts of that course where we're calculating statistics and control charts and that sort of thing. So it's this mix of things, and it's applicable. Like, the roots of the way that I sort of think about it is in manufacturing, but I do a fair bit of consulting and teaching how you design software, internal or external software systems. How do you make other kinds of process improvements? Follows basically the same map. Something I'm likely to do. I'll teach that course in a couple months. Is I decided, we'll see if this annoys my colleagues, but I decided to, like, I'd noticed every organization has, opportunities for process improvement. I might find projects around Darden and let some of the students loose on them. Like, let's go fix some processes here. So that's what that course is about.
All right. And I want to talk about your supply chain elective too. I mean, when people hear the word supply chain, certainly post pandemic, I think we spend a lot more time thinking about supply chain, the global supply chain disruption. I mean, this is obviously a very hot topic here in the United States as well, as we think about maybe even reshoring some of the supply chain for certain companies and certain types of goods. So tell us about your supply chain elective.
Well, the supply chain elective has evolved quite a bit in recent years. Uh, there's still fundamentals, right? You're still fundamentally, the big challenges in running supply chains is operational excellence in what you control, and then managing information and incentives across the other entities that bring your product or service to market. And so it's that. Like I said, when I first started teaching this stuff, the term supply chain wasn't really even a term, and so we would talk about how to run our part of the world well, and then global sourcing sort of took off, and which led to the sort of far flung supply chains that we have now. And so there's more emphasis these days on managing across borders, across firms, and a little bit less on how do I optimize within my world? How do I set the right inventory levels? How do I predict demand? We still do all of those things. And so yeah, so it's I mean it's a case based course as we would do here. We sort of immerse students in. But I teach it. I think a lot of our electives flow this way. Of like, here's some fundamentals you need to understand, and then here let's go tackle how would I transform a supply chain? How would I lead? It's everybody should be taking my elective. I just don't have I don't have, I can't offer enough sections because we're at a moment in time where it it's in the spotlight for a variety of reasons. Largely because of global trade. You mentioned reshoring. So you now have nation states, not just the United States, saying, "Well, we want these things here, we want those things there." So it's trying to prepare students to be ready to help. Supply chains are being reshaped. It's trying to help them be ready to participate in that discussion.
Before we start talking about, some of the forces disrupting global supply chain, your thoughts on that, we got a couple questions about the Darden classroom, and I would be so interested to hear your thoughts about this. So, as a faculty member, you're leading a case discussion. How do you make sure you're hitting your learning objectives while balancing all these different perspectives and strong opinions in the class? Like you got 75, 85 minutes to get through one of these discussions, and you've got lots of people, 65 people in the room, different thoughts. How do you do that?
And there's yeah, so you have uh, I think you'll get wonderfully different answers from every faculty member. Uh, you have a plan in mind, so you don't just walk in and go, what do you guys want to talk about? And and so it's you we design in a way we think this is roughly going to go. Uh, for most cases, we there's at least one or two key things that if if need be, I will force it to go there, but mostly not. Mostly, you want to let the students take ownership of the discussion and let them run it. And one of the things that's important to do, I think this is a general rule of sort of management, not just for teaching, is you you have to hold the students accountable because if they don't prepare and don't get to the right things, if you bail them out, you risk having a few of them go like, wait a minute, I don't really need to prepare because I know if I don't get it, they'll bail me out. So your classmates are all counting on you to be prepared. So yeah, it's yeah, I wouldn't say that this, hey, I have no idea how this 85 minutes is going to go. I know half of how this 85 minutes is going to go. Um, and I think one of the really powerful things about the case method is if the students own the experience, it sticks with them more. Right? That if they take it in some other direction, it sticks with them more. I mean, an example, I mentioned this lift case. We entertained a bit of discussion about, you know, well, not quite ethical, but sort of how people felt about surge pricing. And of course, I was designing the case to say, like, well, what does surge pricing do to how we think about matching supply and demand or AUVs? And the students sort of took it of like, well, look, what's this surge pricing is, I don't like it, or I do. Some people are saying, no, I do like it because then it makes sure that I can get a ride, right? Um, and then we sort of like, well, wait, okay, if surge pricing is a good idea in that setting, why isn't surge pricing a good idea for pick another thing. And so there was sort of, that's an example of where I wasn't in my plan. It meant something to the students and it helped them connect back to the matching supply and demand, um, the demand thing. It's fun. I mean, I don't give the same lecture over and over again, but it's every time the case being a little bit different is fun.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we had an interesting conversation with Panina Feldman on the last office hours about pricing and surge pricing,
Oh
actually.
yeah.
And so it was a lot of fun hearing her perspective on that because I think it's a little bit counter sometimes to how people might think about this, particularly when you start talking about like ticket demand or ride share, that kind of thing. So I'm not surprised to hear you had a robust discussion about it in your class. So
Well, I'd say, Brett, that one of the things we try to do in the core operations course is mess with people's heads so that they can no longer function like normal people. Meaning, and what I mean by that is you can't unsee a long line at Starbucks or the app, or you see surge pricing, or right here in the DC metro area, and there's easy pass, the prices that vary, and you're like, oh my god, I'm getting ripped off because it's $20, and you're like, no, what people like me would think, like, well, it's willingness to pay, and you get to avoid traffic. So it's in fact, we actually use an assignment in that course we've taken to calling ops in the wild, meaning that there's a section of the course where students just report back like, hey, I was waiting for my burrito and I saw this with the queue or the staffing or the pricing or whatever. So and all of that is consistent with this case method of the ownership of the student, like they participated in it, so it's stickier to them.
yeah, I love that point. Well, let's talk a little bit more about your research. So, talked about global supply chain disruption, and so, in your opinion, what are some of the major forces disrupting global supply chains at this point?
Yeah. So I'll go back in time a little bit to when I started studying this, and it was right around the time when North American Free Trade Agreement went in and China joined the World Trade Organization. And so if you look at that from 30-ish years ago, we had three times the manufacturing employment in the US, and over time we shifted to other things. Services went up, manufacturing went down. And so you had this big change in supply chains at the beginning of my career, um, that led to far flung global sourcing. That the devices that we're using to talk to each other are made with 1,000 suppliers and 5,000 parts and 50 countries and so on and so forth that are contributing to it. And so you you know we out lots of countries, lots of wealthy countries looked around the globe for lower labor cost and globally sourced. And then supply chains actually didn't change a tremendous amount for a while. Internet e-commerce made some difference, but we sort of settled into these long, very cost effective, but very fragile supply chains, and gained a lot of benefit from it. Right, the stuff was well made and inexpensive. And then so COVID happens and things break, and people run around and say, "Oh my God, they broke. Do we need to rethink this?" And so the impact of COVID, companies still sorting out how they think about resilience, how they think about what's the right supply chain look like, is I think one factor that's causing a big change. I think there's growing evidence that more and more consumers care about what happens in getting their product or service to them. So there's an uptick in sort of consumer wanting responsibility, however they may think of defining that. And that's along with that goes along with impact investing. So you see investment dollars also like, no, I want to, I want to invest in companies that are doing the right thing socially, environmentally, et cetera. Um, there's technology. So we globally sourced, chasing, generally speaking, lower labor cost. Over time, the amount of labor that it takes to make things goes down because more and more things get automated. So that globally, the number of manufacturing jobs globally is shrinking. So it's not a question of, you know, we sent them there, we sent the jobs there, we want those jobs back. Globally, the jobs are shrinking because of technology, because of automation and AI helping be more efficient, make more stuff with fewer people. And then probably the biggest of the four, or these are the four factors I sort of think through and have research projects in and around each of those four. And then probably the biggest one is the unprecedented actions and efforts by governments to influence supply chains. So the tariffs are sort of the most notable these days, but this is actually not a new thing with the current U.S. administration, and it's not just the U.S. So, examples, we had someone from South Korea staying up late. Hopefully, they haven't fallen asleep on us, right? The U.S. said we want to be a leader in semiconductor. We want more semiconductor stuff here. So the U.S. government said we're going to spend a couple hundred billion. We're going to commit a couple $100 billion to try to influence what the supply chain looks like. South Korea said we're also going to spend a couple $100 billion to try to influence it there. There's things in the EU, there's things in India. So you're seeing unprecedented levels of government action and industrial policy, along with tariffs, along with and so those are factors that I think are trying to some extent, reshape or undo some of the far-flung global supply chains that we have. It's an unprecedented time. I mean, COVID was obviously bad for the world, but brought supply chains to the forefront. I've done, in addition to the degree programs, we do executive education, and financial services firms, private equity firms, when they're talking with us about executive programs, now want a supply chain guy, and that was not true 10 years ago. They wanted leadership, they wanted finance related stuff, they wanted, so things were like, oh, we should get a we need this. So the number of, right, it used to be the people that are like, we run a supply chain, we'd like to know more about supply chain, but now it's everybody because of the big global impact.
So much to unpack there. I wanted maybe a few follow-up questions based upon what you shared. Um, in your opinion, do companies think about, political risk, for example, tariffs, different than sort of the technology part of that equation? Obviously, politics in that sort of political angle can change from administration to administration. Technology, though, seems to move really kind of in one direction, which is just like more and more automation and things getting more technologically sophisticated. How do companies think about those things? Do they think about them differently?
They think about them differently. I mean, that the thing about like this may seem surprising or counterintuitive because we never know how technology is going to evolve. But I think in our current environment, the arc of technology is more predictable than the geopolitics and the trade policy. Meaning, I don't know exactly whatever iteration of AI is going to be, or humanoid robots, or like I don't know exact trajectory, but I sort of know the arc, and I can sort of see where that's going. So if you take away these four if you decouple these four factors that I'm talking about, suppose there weren't sort of trade war tariff posturing, suppose that didn't happen, well then you have this declining manufacturing employment because things are getting more automated. Why did developed countries move to sourcing from lower cost countries, low labor cost? So as there's less and less labor in the manufacturing, if I had something that was totally automated, I would make it where I sell it. Like there's no reason that I would make it 8,000 miles away. If I buy a machine to make the widget, I'll put that machine for the most part where it's going. It could be about access to materials. It could be stable energy, uh, and physical infrastructure. But for the most part, I'd put it near the market so I can respond quickly. I don't have high transportation costs, et cetera. And so even without the trade wars that are going on, we would see manufacturing output moving back to the markets where those products are consumed. And the trade policy is largely accelerating that same that same arc. So you asked how companies think about it. How companies think about it is like, well, I can see this technology arc. The companies that I advise, mostly, not entirely, mostly U.S. based. It's like you can probably predict the things that are going to move to the U.S. or to other developed countries, large consumer market countries first. So things that are highly automated, things that are of the highest value. Um, and then because of the so that's just technology. And then because of the industrial policy is largely interested in things of related to national security, and so you'll have that come in. It's a long answer. Hopefully, I'm hitting the points that you said. But you also talked about sort of the politics. I was given a talk to Virginia Economic Development, people that are like trying to work with companies to move things back to create things in Virginia. So we have actually some exciting things happening in our backyard here of pharmaceutical companies locating manufacturing plants. And what I said, they said like, well, what do you think the things are going to come? And I said, there's certainly things where different political parties will have different views about them. And so those could be subject to election cycles. There's certain things, mostly national security, that the the election cycle isn't going to dramatically change that. So if I think about clean energy, is going to ebb and flow with election, and from the U.S. perspective, ebb and flow with election cycles. National security isn't, and so you can sort of I advise companies to sort of think about like, here's the characteristics of the things that are more reliably going to be produced more here, and get out ahead of those things. And there's other things that aren't going to move as quickly.
You talked about the pandemic and companies still kind of reckoning or coming to terms with the impact of the pandemic. How would you sort of, I mean, it's obviously a very big question, but supply chain resilience now versus, 5, 6 years ago, where do you think things stand globally?
I, I think there's it's different now, and it's different in sort of there's sort of two things that I think have happened. One is that companies underinvested were not sufficiently resilient. You need to be careful about this, because if you say, oh, supply chains broke when there was an unprecedented once every 100-year pandemic, that's actually an unfair criticism, right? Like, because none of us as individual humans say, well, an asteroid might hit near my house, so I should have an asteroid prep situation at my house, right? There's you say like, I could build this giant bunker, whatever it is, and you say like, no, that's so unlikely and it's so costly to do. So it's unfair to say to companies like, well, you should have been ready and just maintained normal operations during COVID. That said, I still think they were underinvested, but that doesn't mean that they should have been completely prepared to cover everything that could. So there was underinvestment. We have some data, I think, that and some research that sort of supports that view. The other thing that's happening is technology is making it easier and easier to manage resilience. And so the reason that companies are becoming more resilient is there's a little bit of they learned a lesson that they were not sufficiently resilient. And resilience is getting cheaper to implement. So why weren't they more resilient 10, 20 years ago? It was high cost and they didn't really see the benefit. The cost of doing it is coming down because of technology. I'll give you one example, which is a big part of insufficient resilience is not your manufacturing operation. It's the supplier to that, or the supplier to the supplier to that. And that, historically speaking, has been just completely dark. Like, I'm assembling iPads and there's a supplier to a supplier to a supplier. And even if I'm Apple with the resources that I have pretty limited visibility to what we call tier 2, tier 3, sub-tier suppliers, a supplier of a supplier of a supplier. And technology, AI is making that easy. It's still a challenge, but it's making it easier, which means that now once I have visibility to where everything is going, I can start making smarter resilience investments. So the cost of being resilient is coming down, and the awareness that you're under resilient is coming up. So there's a upward trend in resilience.
Sort of a natural segue to my next question about how AI is transforming the global supply chain and just operations generally. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bigger applications for so I'd separate generative AI, sort of the AI that's on our minds of like, oh my gosh, I can have Chat GPT will write a whatever for me, or I'm not sponsored by Chat GPT, so any of them. Um, in operations and people running supply chains, we've been deploying. I was building optimization things, and other people have been building optimization things for a long time. You know, we're deploying machine learning. I'm going to make forecasts based on historical sales and inputs. So all of that has just been moving along steadily. I think one of the things that generative AI is doing is making it, since it's dramatically lowered the cost of developing software, it lets companies deploy sort of cutting edge analytics faster. So that's not Gen AI running. That's not a GPT running my supply chain, but it's allowing me to deploy optimization models, connecting portals, et cetera, faster. The place where generative AI, so as I said a bit ago, I think the biggest challenges in the supply chain is coordinating across partners. We actually know pretty well how to optimize. I'm a grocery store. How many boxes of cereal should I stock? Like that's a well structured problem. We have data, we have models, we have analytic models. We can do that sort of thing quickly. Coordinating across the corrugated cardboard manufacturer that makes, or not corrugated, but the cardboard that makes that, and the lumber mill that does that, that's hard. And so that's a place where generative AI can help, is because it can sort of learn, if I'm a supply chain analyst, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to do a resilience study, and I do lots of emails and phone calls and I look at suppliers of suppliers. That's something where generative AI, it's an unstructured problem, and generative AI can sort of help gather that information. So that's at least one place where sort of the cutting edge of generative AI can help in supply chain. I think that we've had chatbots for a while. I think there's sort of more compelling, higher priority use cases for companies, not in supply chain, but in like customer service and curated sales and that sort of thing. We have a couple of great marketing faculty that talk about marketing and AI. So I'll leave that topic for them. You could get them on with you at some point.
I'm also curious about robotics. There's been a lot in the past few weeks about humanoid robotics and some demos from some of these recent conferences. How do you see that coming into operations and supply chain?
I think there's an analog to what I said about AI from structured to unstructured problems on sort of the analytics of supply chain side. If I think about structured to unstructured tasks, physical tasks now, not sort of optimization of using data. Uh, there was a big wave of automation. We're seeing more of it, but there was a big wave of automation in manufacturing several decades ago. And robots for a long time have been very good at welding two pieces of metal together, or right. So very repetitive, well structured, well defined manufacturing tasks. We have robotics. Up until very recently, Amazon and others have been pushing this a little bit. Up until very recently, if you went to a warehouse, fulfillment center, people supporting all of the things that we buy and have shipped to our house. It's a very manual process. So all of this material handling has been very manual up until very recently. So that's an example of the task is less. It's less well defined. I'm like, I have to reach up here for this box, and this customer ordered this thing with this thing. So that is one place. I'm sure there are lots of others We're like, okay, well, now that I have, humanoid robots can start to automate these things that were like we actually solve lots of really interesting problems, right? Because you're sort of like, I'm going to pick up my glasses, I'm going to get a cup of coffee. Like those are all just slightly different, and so that's harder. That historically has been harder to automate. So that's one of the places I see advancement of humanoid robots, moving into those kinds of jobs, which it's hard work to do those kinds of jobs for people. It's dangerous. So there's some benefits to that. There's obviously anytime you displace work, you need to find new places to work. At the moment, right at the moment, the performance of humanoid robots is pretty incredible. The cost is still prohibitive. So you're not seeing sort of mass deployment of humanoid robots yet.
Where does the human fit into all of this, right? So you have increasing automation, you have these technology advances. Obviously, talk about robots. Like, what's the case for humans in these processes?
Humans are great, Brett. I mean, we're fascinating. Um, I'm yeah. I mean, you can find people that are I don't know, pessimistic or alarmist about this. Um, I think the future for humans looks pretty good, and maybe I'm delusional because I'm in a profession where I help teach and develop humans. So I hope that we're still around, and or we're still a big part of this. I, every every technological, like there's generative AI, humanoid robots. It could be different. It's possible, but every other major technological breakthrough that we've had, going back hundreds, probably thousands of years, humans have found new things to do, right? Like the internet was like, oh, we're gonna eliminate all these data entry jobs, or 100 years ago, we're like, oh, I'm a family farmer. What is my grandchild going to do? Like, don't worry, they'll be an influencer, or they'll do search engine optimization. We're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So we've always gone through these phases, and new creative things have happened. I think we're going to be okay. What do you think, Brett? You think we're done for?
No, I don't think we're
Okay.
done for. I mean, I think I agree with you that the sort of the next what this will look like, I probably can't fully anticipate just yet, right? These technologies are new. We're still getting our heads around them. They're obviously still very much in like a developmental state too. I've been really struck by all the conversations about is it a bubble? Is it not a bubble? Like how useful are companies finding AI? I think that story about a year ago was maybe a little bit grim. I think now it's starting to change a bit. So I think we're on, obviously
Yeah.
still early days here. I mean, ChatGPT in terms of like public awareness of it has only been like on our minds maybe for just a few years. So
Yeah. I so the if I had the concern that I'd express is, um, in the U.S. at least. I know we have a global audience, but in the U.S. at least, we have seen massive wealth gains at the aggregate level, and it's growing more and more unequal. And technological breakthroughs that make things more efficient, lower cost, et cetera, create more aggregate wealth. And so my concern isn't what are people going to do. It's how are the benefits going to be distributed? There's going to be big benefits for humanity. How are those going to be distributed? And I would say, we're in the business of helping people get to be influential leaders. Those influential leaders are going to be shaping how the benefits are distributed, and so I think humans have the most important role in this sort of AI revolution.
like I want to ask you just a few more questions here. We're getting close to time, but I want to make sure we have some time to talk about your role leading the lifelong learning initiative here
Sure.
at Darden. So you want to talk a little bit more about that?
I'd love to. So, yeah, I'm the director of the Sands Institute. So you're at Sands Family Grounds. We're grateful to the Sands family for supporting us. The Sands Institute for Executive Education and Lifelong Learning. That's non-degree, could be a short course, could be custom work we do for companies. I mentioned earlier, like, oh, we did this thing with this private equity company. That's them bringing their leaders to us for a week, for example, to experience what we do. I think it's an important strategy. I think that market is an important strategic initiative for Darden, basically for two reasons. One is we were just talking about AI creating disruption and what are the people going to do? They're going to do something. The jobs are going to be different. That means you need retraining. That means you need, so everybody's going to need to be a lifelong learner, which means there's this growing and important market of reaching people throughout their career. So it's a big market. And we take pride in curating and developing world class educational experience, largely for our MBA audience. But we should be taking that to more people who need it, or more people who can benefit from it. So it's a natural thing for us to take these instructors, these professors that invest time and energy in building this expertise, and then go help the world that's going to have this giant sort of retraining. And so the SANS Institute is an entity that is helping us position Darden as a leader for lifelong learning, which is, I think, a natural extension of the experience that we deliver for the MBA programs.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That got asked by a prospective student just yesterday. Where what I think Darden's biggest differentiator is, and to me, it's always been about the educational experience, just how much care and attention is on what happens in terms of educating students
Yeah.
here. It's obviously where the school's really built its brand. Another question for you. You've been so kind and generous to travel on behalf of the admissions team, and we got a few people here in the Q&A who met you in India. I've had a chance to participate in one of the discussions you led there. What's it like to get out there and connect with prospective students and engage in that way?
That's amazing. So I got the privilege. I went to Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Chandigarh, and then a couple months later, I met alums in Hong Kong and then Shenzhen, and then Austin, Texas, a little closer to home. But I mean, it's amazing. I mean, we create such a community. It's hard. It's hard. I'm not creative enough to convey the community feel that we have in our program. You sort of have to feel it, I think. Others may be more eloquent at describing it. And what does that mean? That means that our alums are deeply connected and engaged, and you just feel it when you go around the world, or meet with our alums. And um, you want to be a top business school, you have to be a top global business school. We need global connections, we need global alumni, we need global students, and it's a pleasure to be able to go on the road and connect and try to convey what a great community, what a great learning experience, what a great environment it is, and you feel it. So all those places I mentioned, we had just wonderful, super engaged alums, and it was great to connect with them.
Yeah, it's a very powerful way to sort of experience the Darden networking community. Of course, not everybody's able to come to Charlottesville, so if you're somewhere out there in the world and we're coming to a city near you, uh, please do consider joining us for one of these events. So, Doug, we always ask our guests the same last question. Undoubtedly, some people have got interested in the conversation that we've had here today. So, are there maybe three books you might recommend for people who want to continue reading, continue engaging around some of these questions?
Um, Yeah, I'm glad you warned me that you were going to ask me this, so it wasn't as we say a cold call. But I would say a couple of things. So I'm a big fan of the book Measure What Matters, Don Doerr, which is um, it's in this sort of leading excellence kind of thing, but sort of measure what matters. I think is a really good book on a guy that made a lot of money by helping a lot of companies become very very effective. Uh, Related to supply chains, I think a good, it's just changing rapidly, but I think Chip War by Chris Miller, that sort of talks about the landscape of global semiconductors. And then, one of the things I am constantly trying to do is sort of work-life balance. I get excited about these things, work on it. So a little bit less, not entirely less about supply chain, but I bought and read Outlive by Peter Attia, which is sort of trying to optimize. People are going to live longer and trying to optimize your last 10 years. So health and well-being. One of the things that my wife pointed out that probably meant I wasn't doing a good job of work-life balance is I said, I need to do better with work-life balance. I'm going to get this book about wellness and read it. And I bought it and didn't carve out time to read it for like a year. So I think I failed, but eventually read it. So Measure What Matters, Chip War, and Outlive.
Those are great recommendations, and chips are always in the news seemingly these days. There's just an article in the New York Times this morning about a deal between Taiwan and the United States. So that story continues. So, Doug, what a pleasure being online with you today. To all of our attendees, thank you so much for being here. We'll be back later this month with a conversation with Steve Soltis and June West. That was my conversation with Doug Thomas, a member of the Technology and Operations Management faculty here at the Darden School of Business. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, @virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.